Aiden ran. His breath burned in his lungs, his muscles screamed in protest, but he couldn't stop. Not when death was so close behind. The sky above him was painted in fire, streaks of plasma rained down like the wrath of angry gods. The once great cities of Earth were nothing more than crumbling ruins, shadows of their former selves. The Zerath Dominion had arrived 2 years ago, and in that time, they had turned humanity into nothing but ash and memories. Aiden had survived longer than most. He didn't know why. Luck? Stubbornness? Or was it the sheer refusal to accept extinction? Ahead of him, buried beneath a collapsed military bunker, lay the thing he had been searching for, the last human spacecraft, a relic from a forgotten war. It was broken, covered in dust and overgrowth, but its core still hummed with power. He prayed it would work. Behind him, the Zerath war machines thundered closer. Aiden threw himself into the cockpit, fingers flying over alien controls. A red warning flashed across the screen, but he ignored it. He pressed every button he could. The ship trembled beneath him. Then, suddenly, a blinding light. Aiden felt himself being ripped away from Earth, his body weightless as the ship was sucked into the void. And then, nothing. Aiden drifted between consciousness and darkness. His body felt impossibly heavy, his thoughts sluggish, like he was trapped in a dream he couldn't wake from. A faint hum resonated through his bones. The air smelled strange, like rain on metal and something sweetly unfamiliar. Then came the voices. Is it truly human? I thought they were all extinct. His heart pounded. He tried to move, but cold metal bit into his wrists. Restraints. His breath hitched as his vision slowly adjusted. He was in a grand hall, unlike anything he had ever seen. Towering pillars of crystalline metal rose into a high, domed ceiling where shimmering constellations flickered like a moving tapestry of stars. Floating orbs of golden light hovered in midair, casting long, eerie shadows across the polished obsidian floor. And around him stood beings unlike any he had encountered before. They were tall, at least a head or two taller than any human. Their forms were graceful yet powerful, draped in flowing robes and intricate armor that shimmered with iridescent hues. Their eyes, glowing like burning gemstones, bore into him with an unsettling mixture of curiosity and suspicion. Aiden's instincts screamed at him to run. But his body remained still, bound, vulnerable. Then he noticed the throne. At the far end of the chamber, elevated upon a raised platform, sat her. She was unlike the others. More regal, more striking. Her hair cascaded like molten gold, shimmering with each subtle movement. Her violet eyes locked onto his, piercing through him with an intensity that sent a shiver down his spine. She wore an intricate gown of woven starlight, the fabric shifting and changing with every breath she took. Aiden had seen many strange, beautiful things in his life, but nothing compared to her. She was watching him, studying him. The room was silent, waiting. Finally, she rose. Her movement was fluid, effortless, like gravity barely applied to her. With deliberate steps, she descended the grand staircase, each footfall light as a whisper. Aiden barely breathed as she approached. She stopped just before him, tilting her head. A single flick of her fingers, and his restraints unlocked with a soft chime. His arms dropped to his sides, numb from being held in place for too long. Still, he didn't move. Finally, she spoke. Curious. Her voice was both soft and commanding, like a melody woven with steel. A human, after all this time. Aiden swallowed hard. His throat was dry, but his mind was racing. What did she mean by, after all this time? How long had he been unconscious? And more importantly, where the hell was he? He glanced around, noting how every single alien in the room was watching him, waiting. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut. Aiden's instincts, honed from years of survival, screamed at him that this was a moment of great significance. A moment that could decide his fate. So he met her gaze, refusing to look away. I think you have me at a disadvantage here, he said, voice hoarse but steady. You know what I am. But I have no idea who you are. For a moment there was silence. Then, she smiled. It was small, almost imperceptible. But it was there. And something told Aiden that his fate was now tied to hers. You are human! Her voice, soft yet laced with undeniable authority, sent a chill through the chamber. Aiden swallowed hard, feeling the weight of every gaze upon him. The room was utterly silent, save for the distant hum of energy pulsing through the crystalline walls. Waiting. Judging. He exhaled slowly, then nodded. Yeah, he rasped, his throat still dry. Last one, I think. A murmur swept through the gathered nobles and warriors, their reactions ranging from shock to suspicion. Some whispered among themselves, others simply stared, as if he were a ghost of something long forgotten. But Seraphina remained unreadable. Her violet eyes held his gaze, searching for something. Aiden wasn't sure if she found it, but when she finally spoke, her words were like ice. You are not supposed to exist. Aiden let out a dry, bitter laugh. Yeah, well, either is my planet anymore. For the first time, her expression wavered. It was subtle, a flicker of something in her eyes. Sympathy? Regret? Whatever it was, it disappeared as quickly as it came. She opened her mouth as if to speak again. Then the doors to the throne room slammed open with a force that shook the very ground beneath them. A figure stepped through. Massive. Clad in segmented black armor, etched with glowing crimson runes. His skin, a metallic silver that reflected the dim light. His 6 glowing eyes locked onto Aiden with something between contempt and hatred. Zyrek, the warlord. Aiden didn't need an introduction. The way the room tensed, the way even the guards subtly shifted their stances, it told him everything he needed to know. A leader. A killer. And very, very dangerous. Zyrek's deep, rumbling voice broke the silence. He is a threat. His words were like a blade unsheathed. A relic of a dead race. I say we end him now. Aiden's pulse quickened. Yeah, fantastic. First day in alien court, and he was already on trial for simply existing. But Seraphina? She didn't even flinch. He is under my protection. The entire hall froze. Aiden blinked. I am? Zyrek's fangs bared, his upper lip curling in disgust. You protect a human? Do you forget what their kind has done? Aiden didn't like the way he said that. What their kind has done? Seraphina's voice remained firm, unwavering. I remember everything, warlord. But I will decide his fate. Not you. The tension in the air was suffocating. Aiden knew he had just landed in the middle of something far bigger than himself. This wasn't just about survival anymore. He was caught between a warrior princess and a battle-hardened warlord, standing at the heart of an empire that should have erased humans from existence long ago. And things were about to get even worse. That night, Seraphina visited Aiden's chambers. The room was dimly lit by soft, floating orbs of pale blue light. The walls, crystalline and smooth, reflected their glow, casting long, shifting shadows. Aiden had been staring at the ceiling, trying to process the insanity of his situation, when the door whispered open. She stepped inside, her flowing gown barely making a sound against the smooth floors. You are in danger, she said simply. My father will not allow you to stay. Zyrek will demand your execution. Aiden exhaled, sitting up on the strange, yet oddly comfortable, alien bed. So what? He asked, rubbing the back of his neck. You're here to tell me goodbye before they throw me into space? No. She met his gaze, and Aiden felt an unfamiliar shiver run down his spine. There was no hesitation in her stance, no uncertainty in her voice. She had already made her decision. I am here to help you escape. Aiden blinked. You want to help me? He said, as if repeating the words would make them make sense. She nodded. Why? Seraphina hesitated, just for a fraction of a second. Then, softly, she said, Because I believe the universe still has need of humans. And because I refuse to let you die for something you had no part in. Aiden studied her, searching for deception, but found none. She was serious. Dead serious. He let out a slow breath, then grinned despite himself. Well, Princess, he said, leaning forward slightly, if you're going to help me break out, you'd better have a good plan. She smiled, just a little. I always do. The escape plan. Aiden soon realized. Escape wasn't going to be as simple as sneaking out the back door. The palace was a fortress, nestled high above the glowing city below, floating atop an enormous crystalline structure. Towering spires stretched into the night sky, and dozens of armed sentinels patrolled every corridor. There were no ships docked nearby, and even if there were, Aiden had zero clue how to fly one. Seraphina, however, was not deterred. There is a supply transport scheduled to leave at dawn, she explained, as they moved swiftly through a hidden passageway behind her chambers. It's bound for the outer colonies. If we can board it before departure, we can slip away unnoticed. Aiden frowned. And what happens if they notice? Seraphina glanced at him. Then we run. Great, Aiden muttered. Because running has worked out so well for me so far. She ignored him and pressed on. The hidden tunnels wove deep beneath the palace, narrow and winding. Aiden could tell they were ancient, the air thick with dust, the walls etched with markings long forgotten. He didn't ask how she knew about them, a princess always had her secrets. But just as they reached an exit near the docking bay, a metallic voice boomed through the corridor. Intruders detected. Aiden froze. Red warning lights flickered to life. From the shadows, mechanical sentinels, sleek, insect-like machines with glowing cores, emerged, their weapons humming with energy. Seraphina's expression didn't change. Time to run, she said. And then, all hell broke loose. The pursuit. They sprinted through the corridor, dodging as blasts of energy sizzled past them. Aiden ducked behind a pillar as a bolt shattered the wall behind him. You know, he panted, I was kinda hoping for a quiet escape. Seraphina, moving with effortless grace, slid behind cover next to him. I don't do quiet, she admitted, drawing a weapon from her belt. The weapon looked like a sleek, crystalline blade, but then, with a flick of her wrist, it hummed to life, extending into a curved, crackling arc of pure energy. Aiden's eyes widened. That, he said, pointing, is extremely cool. Seraphina didn't respond. She moved. Fast. She lunged at the nearest sentinel, the blade slicing through metal like butter. Sparks flew as the machine collapsed in a heap, its core flickering once before going dark. Aiden barely had time to process what he'd just seen before more sentinels poured in from the far side of the corridor. Oh, come on! He shouted, rolling to avoid another blast. Seraphina was already cutting a path forward, her movements precise, almost dance-like. Aiden, meanwhile, scrambled to grab a fallen weapon, some kind of pulse rifle. He barely had time to figure out the trigger before a sentinel leapt at him. Instinct took over. He fired. The rifle kicked back hard, sending a pulse of white-hot energy straight into the machine's chest. It exploded in a shower of sparks. Aiden blinked. Huh. I'm not terrible at this. Less talking, Seraphina said, slicing another sentinel in half. More running. Aiden didn't argue. They bolted toward the docking bay, alarms blaring in the distance. The final stretch. By the time they reached the transport ship, the entire palace was on high alert. Guards were pouring in from all sides. The ship's ramp was still rising, its engines roaring to life. Aiden glanced at Seraphina. You got a plan for this part? She nodded. Then, without warning, she grabbed his hand and jumped. Aiden barely had time to scream as they soared through the air, the ground vanishing beneath them. The ship's ramp was almost closed. Seraphina twisted midair through her blade. The weapon lodged into the mechanism, stopping the ramp just enough. They landed. Hard. Aiden groaned as he rolled onto his back. Okay. He wheezed. That was the single coolest thing I've ever done. Seraphina retrieved her weapon, flicking it closed. You get used to it. Then, before Aiden could catch his breath, a deafening explosion rocked the ship. His eyes widened. What now? Seraphina's expression darkened as she glanced toward the viewport. Outside, a fleet of warships was already in pursuit. Zyrek was not going to let them escape without a fight. Aiden exhaled. Things had just gotten a whole lot worse. They barely made it out alive. Seraphina had stolen a royal cruiser, a sleek, obsidian black vessel designed for speed rather than war. It had stealth capabilities, advanced shielding, and, most importantly, it was fast. But not fast enough. The moment they broke through the palace airspace, the Empire's elite hunters were already in pursuit. Aiden had never flown an alien ship before. He barely understood half the controls flashing in front of him. But right now, he didn't have a choice. Left. Left. Seraphina shouted. I know. Aiden growled, yanking the controls. The ship veered hard to the left, engines screaming in protest as plasma fire erupted behind them. The explosion sent a shockwave through the void, shaking the cruiser like a leaf in a storm. Aiden gritted his teeth, fighting for control. Behind them, 3 pursuit ships, sleek, needle-like vessels, moved with terrifying precision, their cobalt blue thrusters glowing in the darkness. These weren't just any pilots. These were Imperial Shadow Strikers. The best. The deadliest. And they wanted him dead. Shields at 20%. Seraphina warned, checking the console. They won't hold much longer. Tell me something I don't know. Aiden snapped, jerking the ship into a barrel roll to dodge another incoming blast. Seraphina's fingers flew across the controls. I might have an idea. Hold course for another 60 seconds. Aiden laughed humorlessly. I don't think we have 60 seconds. Another shot grazed their starboard wing, sending sparks flying through the cockpit. The ship lurched, alarms blaring in a chaotic chorus. Aiden's knuckles were white on the controls. His breath came fast and shallow. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't a fighter. He was just a guy trying to survive. But at this moment, survival meant beating the best pilots in the Empire at their own game. And that was impossible. The asteroid field. Seraphina suddenly punched in coordinates. Aiden barely had time to glance at the NAV screen before a massive asteroid field loomed into view ahead of them. His heart stopped. That's your plan? He shouted. Flying into a death maze? Seraphina gave him a sharp look. Do you have a better idea? Aiden gritted his teeth. Fine. But if we die, I'm haunting you. He pushed the throttle to maximum, and the cruiser plunged into the asteroid field at breakneck speed. Instantly, the world became chaos. Massive chunks of space rock, some as big as mountains, others no larger than a car, spun wildly around them. The ship's collision alarms screamed as Aiden weaved through the deadly terrain, twisting, rolling, barely squeezing through narrow gaps. Behind them, the pursuers hesitated. A Shadow Striker pilot was good, but even they had limits. Aiden didn't. Mostly because he had no idea what he was doing. Hold on, he yelled, tilting the cruiser vertically to slip between 2 massive boulders that crashed together a split second later. Seraphina cursed in Dracarian, gripping the armrest so hard her knuckles turned white. Are you even aiming? She demanded. Not really, Aiden admitted. Another explosion rocked the field. One of the pursuit ships clipped an asteroid too late. It spiraled out of control before detonating in a fiery blast. Aiden whooped. 1 down. But 2 remained. And they were learning. Damn it, Seraphina muttered, slamming a fist on the console. They're mirroring your flight patterns. Aiden frowned. Then we need to do something unpredictable. He took a deep breath. Then, he cut the engines. Zero gravity gamble. The sudden loss of thrust sent the cruiser spinning wildly. Inside the cockpit, gravity vanished. Aiden and Seraphina floated for a split second, weightless. The pursuers reacted too late. The 2 remaining ships overshot their target, trying to compensate, but Aiden re-engaged thrusters at the last second, yanking the ship into a sharp turn. Right toward the nearest asteroid. What are you doing? Seraphina yelled. Something really stupid, Aiden shouted back. He pitched the ship downward at the last second, scraping past the asteroid's surface so closely that the cruiser's underbelly sparked. The pursuers weren't so lucky. One clipped the asteroid's edge, spinning out of control before slamming into another rock. Fire and debris exploded outward. The last remaining hunter barely avoided the wreckage, but now it was alone. Aiden grinned. Your move, buddy. Final escape. The last enemy pilot wasn't giving up. Whoever they were good, really good. They twisted and maneuvered, dodging every trick Aiden threw at them. Plasma shots whizzed past the cockpit, and the hunter was closing in. Then, Seraphina saw it. A dark rift in the asteroid field. A swirling void of crackling blue energy. A wormhole. It was unstable. Uncharted. Unpredictable. Seraphina's jaw tightened. Aiden, she said firmly. We have one chance. Head straight for the wormhole. He glanced at her. That thing looks horrifically unstable. Seraphina's gaze didn't waver. Would you rather get shot down? Aiden groaned. Fine. But if this kills us, I'm definitely haunting you. With a final shove on the thrusters, the cruiser plunged into the wormhole. The world turned inside out. Colors blurred. Time stretched. Aiden felt his body being pulled and compressed and expanded all at once. Seraphina gripped his arm, her nails digging in. Then, everything went dark. Aftermath. Aiden woke up to silence. The ship wasn't shaking. The alarms were off. He groaned, sitting up. His head felt like it had been stomped on by a very large alien horse. Did we make it? He croaked. Seraphina was already at the controls, checking the readings. We're somewhere else, she said slowly. Far beyond Imperial space. Aiden let out a long breath. Good. Great. Fantastic. Then, she turned to him. Her eyes searched his, and for the first time, he saw something there. Trust. And maybe something more. They found refuge on a distant moon, a desolate rock at the edge of an uncharted system. It wasn't much, just a barren landscape of jagged cliffs, dry riverbeds, and a thin atmosphere barely breathable even for Seraphina's kind. But it was hidden. Isolated. For a while, they thought they were safe. But the Empire never forgot. And Zyrek never let go of a grudge. The hunters came 3 days later. Their scout ships cut through the dusty sky like shadows, scanning the moon's surface with eerie precision. Aiden and Seraphina hid within the ruins of an ancient alien structure, its worn pillars and collapsed walls whispering of a civilization lost to time. Aiden watched the sky, jaw clenched. They found us. Seraphina didn't answer. She didn't need to. She was already checking her plasma blades, her wings flexing tensely as she prepared for battle. Her golden eyes burned with determination. They had a choice. Run or fight. Seraphina took a slow breath. And she chose to fight. Preparing for war. Aiden wasn't a warrior. He wasn't bred for battle like the Dracarys princess standing beside him. He had no superhuman strength, no plasma breath, no legendary combat training. He was just human. But he had come too far to back down now. Seraphina turned to him, her expression unreadable. You don't have to do this, Aiden. He laughed, shaking his head. After everything? Yeah, I do. Her gaze softened, just for a second. Then she handed him a pulse rifle. You only get one shot at this, she said. Make it count. Aiden nodded. They didn't have numbers. They didn't have firepower. But they had something better. A plan. The Empire strikes. The sky shattered with the arrival of Zyrek's flagship. The warship was a hulking behemoth, dark and angular, its surface lined with plasma cannons and deployable hunter drones. It hovered above the ruins like a god of war, casting the entire battlefield in shadow. Then the dropships came. Dozens of them, sleek and deadly, their engines screaming as they descended upon the moon's surface. Armored troops spilled out in waves, rifles glowing with charged plasma, their movements precise, mechanical. A voice echoed from the warship's loudspeakers, deep and commanding. Seraphina Dracaris. You are guilty of treason against the Empire. Surrender, and your death will be swift. Resist, and you will beg for the void. Zyrek. Aiden exhaled sharply, adjusting his grip on the rifle. Friendly guy, he muttered. Seraphina's wings flared, her jaw tightening. He's bluffing. He won't make it quick. Aiden swallowed. Great. Then the first shots were fired. The battle. The ruins became a war zone. Blaster fire lit up the darkness, explosions ripped through ancient stone, sending debris flying in all directions. Seraphina was a storm of motion, her plasma blades cutting through enemy ranks like lightning. Her wings propelled her forward, dodging fire with inhuman grace as she took down soldier after soldier. Aiden? He fought smarter. He didn't have her speed. He didn't have her strength. But he had a brain. He used the ruins as cover, setting up traps, collapsing walls, rerouting energy surges to short-circuit enemy weapons, using every scrap of knowledge he had to turn the battlefield against them. One soldier got too close. Aiden spun, using a piece of ancient alien tech as a makeshift shock weapon, sending the enemy flying. Another raised a blaster, only to be caught by Seraphina's plasma blade, cutting through armor like paper. They fought like they had been born for this moment. But the Empire kept coming. And then, he arrived. Zyrek. The air vibrated as Zyrek descended from his warship, his black and gold armor glinting in the flickering firelight. He was massive, even larger than Seraphina, his scaled skin gleaming under the twin moons. His crimson eyes locked onto them with a predatory gleam. He didn't need an army. He was the army. Seraphina stepped forward, breathing hard but standing tall. This ends now, Zyrek. A slow, cruel smile curved across his face. Yes. It does. Then he moved. Aiden barely saw it, just a blur of black and gold, before Zyrek was upon them. Seraphina met him head-on, their blades clashing in a storm of energy, sparks flying as they traded blindingly fast strikes. Aiden could only watch, hard hammering. Seraphina was strong. But Zyrek was stronger. Every strike drove her back, his attacks relentless, crushing, unstoppable. Aiden knew she couldn't win this fight alone. And so, he did what he did best. He outsmarted him. The trap. As Seraphina battled Zyrek, Aiden moved. He darted through the ruins, using the chaos to reach the ancient alien console he had discovered earlier. It was old. Damaged. But still active. And Aiden had spent hours studying it. It was a defense system, one designed to protect this long-dead civilization. And now? He was going to bring it back to life. Zyrek was seconds away from delivering the final blow when Aiden activated the system. The ground rumbled. The air crackled. And suddenly, the ruins came alive. Ancient energy turrets rose from the ground, their dormant cores flaring blinding white. Massive gravity fields activated, pulling Empire soldiers into the air, disarming them instantly. And Zyrek? He barely had time to turn before a pulse blast the size of a starship slammed into him, sending him soaring into the sky, crashing into his own warship with a deafening boom. The Empire's forces panicked. With their leader gone, their army in chaos, and the battlefield turning against them, they fled, their remaining ships tearing through the sky, retreating into the stars. Aiden stood there, breathing hard, staring at the wreckage. Did we just win? Seraphina was watching him. For a long moment, she didn't speak. Then, she smiled. Yes, she said softly. We did. The escape. The Empire would regroup. They would come again. But not today. Seraphina and Aiden climbed into their battered ship, the engines humming to life. As they lifted off, Aiden glanced at her. So, where to now? Seraphina's gaze drifted to the endless expanse of space before them. Somewhere out there, the unknown awaited. She turned back to him. Anywhere. Aiden grinned. And together, they disappeared into the stars. Free. Together. The ship drifted silently in orbit above an untouched world. Below them, the planet stretched out in rolling green valleys, towering violet forests, and rivers that shimmered like liquid silver beneath the twin moons. It was a place unmarked by war, unspoiled by empire. A new beginning. Aiden and Seraphina sat on the open ramp of their stolen cruiser, feet dangling over the edge as they watched the sun rise over this uncharted world. The first light of dawn washed over the sky in shades of amber and crimson, reflecting off the ship's battered hull, the last scar of a battle that had nearly cost them everything. Aiden let out a slow breath, stretching his sore muscles. "Well," he said, running a hand through his dust-covered hair. "What now?" Seraphina didn't answer immediately. She was watching the sunrise, golden eyes glowing in the morning light, her wings tucked close around her shoulders. The past few days had been a storm, running, fighting, nearly dying. But here, in this moment, there was only silence. Only peace. Finally, she smiled. "We build a future." Aiden turned to her, arching an eyebrow. "You mean we?" Her gaze met his. She didn't hesitate this time. Her fingers brushed his, a simple touch, but warm, deliberate. Unmistakable. "Yes." Her voice was soft but firm. "We." Aiden held her gaze for a long moment, the weight of everything they had been through hanging between them. They had survived the Empire. Outwitted Zyrek. Escaped across the stars with nothing but their wits, their courage, and each other. And now? Now, they had the one thing they had never dared to dream of. A chance to start over. Aiden exhaled, shaking his head with a quiet chuckle. "You know, if someone told me a month ago I'd be stranded on an alien planet with a dragon princess, I'd have called them insane." Seraphina smirked. "If someone told me I'd be choosing a human over my own empire, I would have burned them alive." Aiden laughed, leaning back on his hands. "Glad we've both grown as people." She shook her head, rolling her eyes, but there was no irritation in it. Only affection. She looked out over the endless horizon, the sunlight painting the world in gold. "So," she murmured, "where do we begin?" Aiden followed her gaze, watching as the wind stirred the grasslands far below. The possibilities stretched out before them like an open book, waiting to be written. For the first time in his life, he wasn't running. For the first time in her life, either was she. He reached over and laced his fingers with hers. "Wherever we want." And as the first dawn of their new world broke over the horizon, the last human and his alien bride set off toward the unknown, ready to write a new legend.